Now then guys, welcome back to Range 23. My name's Bob, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Holosun 510C red dot optic. This one was sent in by a viewer of the channel, so a big thanks to you, Ollie, for sending that in. You've just earned yourself a Range 23 Superfan badge. Make sure you wear it with pride, my friend. Now, it's no secret that I am a big fan of Holosun's optics lineup. They make some really well-designed, feature-rich sights at an affordable price point. And I'm not just saying that to appease our future Chinese overlords. I genuinely believe it. They've been kind of out for about 10 years or so now, and in that time they've made some really good leaps and bounds. So let's take a look at this one. So the 510C is one of Holosun's open emitter optics from their lineup, and what that means, if you're unfamiliar with that terminology, is that basically it works exactly the same as a traditional red dot, in that you've got an LED emitter which projects an image onto a lens and that bounces back into your eye, but you don't have the unit encased like a traditional kind of tube style aim point or something like that. There's no rear lens, the unit is open to the elements, which has some advantages and disadvantages which we'll talk about in a bit. But first, I just want to go over the specs and features of this thing. So straight off the bat, you can see this thing resembles basically a large kind of pistol style optic. Same layout, same design basically, but everything's just bigger. We've got our lens at the front, our emitter at the back with our windage and elevation adjustments. They are in half MOA increments, and they are shrouded as well, so there's no risk of knocking them. You do need a tool to adjust them. We've got our plus and minus control buttons on the side for raising and lowering the brightness. They also do add some other functionality which we'll talk about later as well. We've got a battery tray on the side here, which is nice. It means you don't have to take the optic off to change the battery like you do on a lot of pistol optics. But you do need tools to get into that. And unlike a lot of kind of pistol plates where you have a bolt-on plate, basically this one has a QD Picatinny mount attached to the underside of the optic. It is detachable. You can get riser plates and adapter plates and things like that for this optic, but most people probably won't need them. And you also do get a protective hood over the top of the optic, which is actually made of titanium, and more on that later. So the first thing you're going to notice when you look through this is just how large that window is. It's bigger than an EOTech, probably not quite as big as a Vortex UH1, but it is definitely on the bigger side, certainly compared to a lot of red dot sights out there. That's a feature I really like. A lot of people say it doesn't matter because you should be shooting with both eyes open, which is true to a degree. But when you're coming onto the gun from an awkward position, you're not quite getting your head right, direct lined up behind the optic, this thing is a lot more forgiving. So I really like that, certainly for dynamic style shooting. The other thing it's good for as well is if you're running the magnifier behind this, it just gives you a little bit more height to play with. You don't have to have your magnifier perfectly lined up. You can go a little bit higher and lower, which again is something that I really appreciate with it. So the other thing to note with that big lens is that the reticle is projected completely edge to edge on it, looking at you Vortex UH1. And the other thing as well is because this is an open emitter and you don't have the hood extending all the way to the back and a rear lens, is your sight picture appears much less cluttered. It's much cleaner. It's like when we all went from having those old school TVs with the really thick bezels to these new modern ones with the really thin bezels. It's kind of like that. It's just a nice optic to look down. And whilst we're talking about that glass, it is worth mentioning that this thing does have a fairly visible notch filter, which gives it that blue tint. Now, it's not the worst I've seen, but it's certainly not the best. But to be honest, once you start shooting with an optic and you transition to targets, you don't really notice it's there, to be honest. It's only really if you're looking for it, but it is definitely there. The 510C does also have Holosun's Multiratical technology, which is just basically a fancy way of saying it has two different emitter patterns, two different reticles in there. You have your 2 MOA center dot, like the majority of other red dots out there, and you also have a 65 MOA ring with notches at the 12, 3, 6 and 9 position, similar to the outer ring on an EOTech. And what that means is basically you can switch between different modes. You can switch between just having the dot on, just having the ring on, or having the dot and the ring as well, which essentially gives you like an EOTech style reticle. Now, I'm not really sure why I'd want to use just the ring on its own without the center dot, because it is kind of useless, to be honest. The only thing I can really think it might be somewhat useful for is shotgun, but even then, a bit shit. But it's nice that they included the option for it. You have the 2 emitters, so you might as well put it in there, right? And I'm sure there'll be, someone out there who actually find that useful. If that's you, go ahead and let us know your reasons for doing so in the comments, so we can all judge you and try to work out what went wrong in your life. And whilst we're talking about the reticle, I've got to say it's actually a really crisp, clean looking reticle. Even if you're someone like me who has astigmatism, this thing just appears just really, really sharp, which is something I've noticed from a lot of optics from Holosun. I've got a couple of ACSS reticle Holosuns, and again, the reticles in them just look really, really sharp, really clean. Even under magnification, I've had a 6x magnifier behind this thing, and again, that reticle, even with the outer ring and them hashes, everything just looks super smart, super clean. There's no real bloom or anything like that, which you do get from a lot of other red dots out there, even higher end ones. So yeah, if you're someone who suffers with astigmatism or something similar, it might be well worth looking at Holosun optics for that reason. Now, only a complete and utter bell end would tell you how good this reticle looks under magnification without actually rolling in any footage of it. So yeah. So moving swiftly on to brightness, this optic has 12 brightness settings, 2 of which are night vision specific, which probably most of us won't really need that, and all it means is that they're a lot dimmer than the other settings. There's nothing fancy about that. But the settings I've found are all pretty good. They're all evenly spaced, fairly evenly spaced. I've always been able to find something that suits the conditions perfectly for me. It's also daylight bright as well. I took this out on bright sunny days, and even looking up into the sky with it, you can clearly see the reticle. It doesn't wash out at all, which is nice. The 510C also has an auto brightness feature on it. You can just activate that and deactivate it by holding down one of the side buttons here, and obviously that'll just adjust the optic's brightness to the ambient light. Like most optics that have that system, I've found it works well about 80–90% of the time. Most of the time outside it's fine, but when you're kind of in say woodland or where you've got thick shadow over the optic, or if you're going from outside to inside, things like that, it generally leaves a little bit to be desired. You want to find yourself manually adjusting the brightness, but like I say, you can disable it, so it's not the end of the world. It's nice that they added that feature again. I'm sure some people will find that useful. So the optic is powered by a single CR2032, which is accessed via this side little battery compartment here. You do need some Torx bits to get in and out of there, but it is advertised as having a 50,000 hour battery life, which is kind of years and years. But that will depend on the reticle you have selected and the brightness you have selected as well. And when it comes to battery saving, this thing has a few more tricks up its sleeve. Like a lot of other Holosun optics, it has their shake awake technology, which means if the reticle isn't, if the optic, is put down, if you put your gun down after so long, if it doesn't detect movement, it will just power the optic down, and then as soon as you pick it up and give it a little shake, it'll power back into life. To be honest, it doesn't actually need that much movement at all. You could literally just kind of gently pick this thing up off the bench and it'll come on. I've not had any issue with that on this or any of my other optics. It just seems to work really well. Obviously, will save you a lot of battery life if you're just putting your gun back in the safe, that type of thing. But by far the coolest battery saving kind of efficiency feature on this optic is the inclusion of that solar panel on the top there, which means that in daylight, not only can you rely on that to power the optic instead of draining the battery, but it's also got a capacitor built into the red dot as well, which means if your battery goes flat or if you remove the battery altogether, not only will the solar panel power the optic in the daylight, but if you then transition inside or into the dark, the capacitor will use any excess energy gathered by that solar power and power the optic on for another few minutes until you're back outside, which is really cool actually. A completely and utterly useless feature for 99.9% of us, but extremely cool I think all the same. So now we've looked at the specs and features, let's take a look at what the optics actually like to shoot with in the field. And to be honest, I quite like it. It's a nice little red dot, to be honest. It's, I say little, it's actually quite large. It's just, it has the deceiving appearance of being smaller with it being this open emitter style design. But yeah, it's actually got quite a large footprint on the gun, as you can see. But yeah, I've really enjoyed using it. I found it pretty useful. It's, I like the multi-reticle system on it. You know, being able to select what you want for different scenarios. Although to be fair, I've generally just run it with the dot and the ring as well. Like it's kind of both reticles on, and kind of stuck to that. But I guess if you were transitioning it to different guns or something like that, it'd be nice to have. And yeah, and speaking like features, I'd say it's the kind of most feature dense optic I've used yet, certainly red dot. You know, you've got night vision compatibility, you've got the solar, you've got the multi-reticle system, you've got shake awake, you've got auto brightness, you know, the list goes on. So yeah, definitely the most feature dense kind of optic I've used. There's going to be something out there for everyone with it. Something else is the controls on it are nice and easy and accessible on the side of the optic there. Tactile as well, even using gloves. I've not had any worries if I'm actually pressing them. You can feel, if not hear, the clicks from them. Mount's nice. It seems to return to zero, at least on this rifle. I was kind of been shooting this out to kind of 80, 100 yards at some point with a magnifier. Seems to return to zero pretty well, even though there is no actual recoil indexing lug on there. You just use the crossbolt on it. But like I say, it seems to work pretty well. So yeah, I quite like it actually. It's nice. There's a nice crisp clean bezel on there as well. Nice big open glass like we talked about before to kind of, if you come onto the gun, if you're coming on from an awkward position, shooting from the opposite shoulder, things like that. Very easy to find a reticle on it. So yeah, it's a nice performing, very feature dense optic. I'm struggling to think like who it's aimed at, what kind of section of the market it's aimed at. Like I say, on the one hand, you know, you've made it extremely like rugged and reliable, you know, like feature rich. You've also got like night vision compatibility, huge battery life, solar backup, capacitor backup on top of the solar backup. You know, you've even ruggedized the thing with a fucking titanium hood over the top of it to stop it getting damaged. And then you've gone and made it an open emitter, which will allow shit and debris and water and stuff to get in onto there and cause the optic to become unusable until it's been wiped down and cleaned. I don't know, it's just I find it an odd choice, to be honest. You know, like the battery tray as well, needing tools to be able to get in there, Torx bits. It seems an odd choice to me when you could have had a toolless option. But and I don't know, maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it. You know, I suppose it's a Chinese optic and they're pretty industrious. You know, they've probably got set Torx bits on them all the time to get into there. They love fixing electronics. But yeah, so I don't know. It's a good, don't get me wrong, it's a good performing solid optic, but yeah, just the open emitter design, it just seems an odd choice. Now, I will say I didn't have any real issues with this being open emitter, but you know, it's not my optic. I'm not torch testing it and throwing it around kind of thing. I did do some water testing because it wasn't raining when I was, every time I went out with this, it was dry, unfortunately. But I did do some water testing, just splashing a bit in there, and it had the effect you'd imagine, where the dot completely either disappeared or became just a big mess of a blur until it was wiped out. And again, the emitter has got a cover on it here, which is easy to wipe down if you need to, so it's not the end of the world. But I imagine if you were out in the heavy rain or you know, using this in like a dusty environment, something like that, it could certainly start to cause you some problems. Just something to be aware of. Like I said, probably not an issue for 99% of shooters, but just something to keep an eye on with it, really. So with all that said, what are my kind of final thoughts on the 510C? Well, yeah, I like it. I think it's a good optic, to be fair. I think it's got some really, really cool features with it. Whether you'll use them or not is up to you and your situation, but it's nice that they've crammed so much into this optic. It doesn't seem to really affect the performance of it or anything like that. A lot of the time when features are added to optics, it can give in one sense and take away with another. But this seems to be a really nice, well-balanced optic. Everything seems to work well on it. Like I said, my only concern would be that open emitter design, but that might not be an issue for you guys, depending on your usage scenario. Personally, I'd probably opt for a 512C over this, which is basically an enclosed version of this optic with most of the features on there. But that's just my personal preference. I don't think you can really go wrong with this. Like I say, it's a nice optic, magnifies well, seems to be fairly parallax free, returns to zero, comes with a mount, all that stuff. So yeah, definitely one to consider if you're in the market for something a little bit different, guys. So there you go, guys. Those are my ramblings on the Holosun 510C red dot optic. I hope you've enjoyed that, or at least found it useful. If you have done, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, because those are the rules here at Range 23. And yeah, thank you all for watching as always, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.